Thanks for staying with us right here on BERNAMA World. After a high-stakes summit in Alaska, Donald Trump says Ukraine must make a deal with Vladimir Putin, even as Putin reportedly demands Kiev hand over the entire Donetsk region. Now, President Zelensky rejected the offer outright, but will meet Trump later today in Washington with European allies in tow. Now, critics say the summit gave Putin legitimacy without delivering peace. Where does this leave Ukraine, Europe, and the credibility of the US or its diplomacy at this point? Now, joining me is Dr. Benjamin Barton, head of school and associate professor in the School of Politics at University of Nottingham, Malaysia. And of course, Dr. Barton, we'd like to thank you for taking time off to do this. I'd like to begin here. Now, Trump dropped the idea of a ceasefire approach and jumped straight to pushing for a peace deal, or at least that's what they're saying now. What does this reveal about his diplomatic instincts, and what are the risks for Ukraine at this point?
Thanks for having me. So obviously, Trump has promised a lot when it comes to this particular conflict. Let's not forget that he promised that this would be solved almost instantaneously when he became president, and that's never happened. Then we moved to the promise of a ceasefire, and that didn't last very long either. Why? Because the Russians did not respect it. So Trump wants a deal, and we've known that for a long time because that's who he has modeled himself as. The president who has been known to advance the art of the deal. But up until now, there's nothing giving, not on this conflict and not in the situation in Gaza either. So, I think he's trying to put a lot of pressure again. That's what he seems to always want to do from the top down, put pressure on the others in order to come to a deal. But for the time being, that has not actually materialized. Now, from the Ukrainian perspective, I think it is indeed fair to suggest that there is an inherent risk to this. And the risk is that the Ukrainians are going to be seen or portrayed in the narrative to, let's say, serving as a stumbling block or putting obstacles to a deal put forward by Trump and possibly by Putin, even though, let's not forget, that they were the ones who had their sovereignty breached by the Russians in the first place. So I think what the Ukrainians want to avoid is that President Trump comes to an agreement with President Putin, as was slated for what might happen in Alaska, and that then they find themselves with this deal, which they don't want, but don't want to be seen as the spoilers at the same time, which they could easily be cast as. So I think that's a risk for the Ukraine, is trying to navigate what are really choppy waters, but at the same time seeking to come to an outcome which is how fragile it may be.
Now, Putin reportedly wants all of Donetsk in exchange for freezing most front lines. With Russia already holding about 3/4 of the region, is this demand a negotiation tactic or a sign Moscow thinks it's winning? Or rather, is this Zelensky's dilemma at this point?
I think that, of course, Russia wants to give out the image that it's winning. On the battlefield, there have been advances, but a huge human cost. Now, in terms of the line being drawn on the map, it would seem that Russia wants to maintain the territory it has claimed so far, or on the battlefield, but almost a bit more. And I suppose the question that then raises is, what is the underlying purpose? This particular region is important for the Ukrainians, not just because it's at the forefront of the battle with Russia over its sovereignty, but also because it represents about 18 to 25% of Ukrainian industrial output. It's about 14% of Ukraine's total GDP. It makes up about 18% of Ukrainian urban population. It's an important part of Ukraine's territory when it comes to oil, gas, minerals, and water, in particular for the southern agricultural belt and for Crimea, which is also claimed by and occupied by Russia. So I think that there's not just a military tactical element to this in terms of solidifying what Russia has gained up until now, but there also seems to be an attempt at taking away from the Ukraine vital assets which are necessary for the survival of a Ukrainian government which would be able to, uphold and implement policies and strategies.
Now, Europe is signaling stronger sanctions and fresh support for Ukraine, even as Trump suggests cutting a deal. Does this divergence risk splitting Western unity, or can Kiev still count on a unified front at this point?
I think it's since Trump has been president, it's difficult to talk of a unified Western position, to be honest with you. Trump has undermined that through his many and his discourse and his attempt to want to etch his own path unilaterally, talking to Russia. Let's not forget about the incident in the Oval Office with President Zelensky. All of this has been done at Trump's behest and by Trump and Trump's team, effectively. And he's marginalized most of America's traditional allies. I think Europe has tried to mitigate the damage by keeping the door of diplomacy open as much as possible, despite the very many frustrations of dealing with an erratic Trump administration. And I think that tomorrow's meeting in Washington, or effectively today's meeting, that will show that there is a possibility of the West coming together, maybe with the prospect of a deal. But still, I think that it's difficult for the Ukrainians to really believe in a united Western position when what America seems to be pushing for doesn't really concord with what Europe wants. I mean, we see that in both of the short video clips that you showed there. On the one hand, the Americans talking about Article 5 outside of NATO, which doesn't make any sense. And on the other hand, the president of the European Commission talking about upholding Ukrainian sovereignty and its borders, no matter what. So, no, I think that for now, there's still just the European position, which is relatively united, the American position, and then under that general umbrella, there is what we could define as a Western position as such.
But optics and legitimacy, that's what I want to look at for a bit. Images of Trump giving Putin a red carpet moment in Alaska have apparently unsettled Ukrainians and critics abroad. Now, how important are optics in a conflict like this? Do they embolden Moscow and weaken Kiev's morale?
Okay, I think we also have to look at the timing of this particular summit. The timing was relatively useful for Trump because, let's face it, in the United States, there are a number of issues which seem to be kind of hurting the Trump administration, even if they won't admit to it. One is the economy. When it comes to creation of jobs and inflation, the numbers are not as good as Trump would like them to be. Then there's also the issue of the Epstein files. That's also seems to be irritating the Trump administration. So this summit was useful for Trump as a distraction, first and foremost. The second thing is Trump's relationship with Russia and his own personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. Trump has been quite consistent in always upholding the vision that Russia is a great power, should be treated as such. He's made that point time and again. No matter whatever's thrown at him, he always sticks to that point. And he has a long history of dealing with Russia going back to the 1980s. For Putin, obviously, Putin can't travel everywhere in the world anymore because he faces a risk of arrest. So for him, yes, I think the optics were particularly good of being able to go to the United States and shake hands with the president and show that, yes, Russia is treated as a great power. And that's one of the things that President Putin, I think, has been himself irked with over time, that Russia often isn't considered to be the great power that it once was and isn't necessarily afforded that particular respect. So I think for him, the summit was a better meeting in terms of the optics than it might have been for Trump.
In less than a minute, what would be what outcomes do you think we can expect? We've got under a minute, Dr. Barton.
Yeah, okay. I think that it will probably be a stalemate coming out of Washington again. The main sticking points being the Ukrainians refusing to cede any of their sovereign borders, sovereign territory to Russia, no matter what guarantees are offered up by the United States, because I think those guarantees will never be what the Ukrainians want, which is to become members of NATO and ultimately a member state of the European Union. I think the Europeans are very much aligned on that point, and that's the point which the Russians simply cannot accept. So I don't think there will be any particular significant gains coming out of the meeting in Washington, but it may lay the groundwork for future meetings to come over the next few months.
Thank you very much. Dr. Benjamin Barton, Head of School and Associate Professor in the School of Politics at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia, talking to us about the Trump meeting with Putin. Of course, we'll be giving you updates as we receive them right here on BERNAMA TV and also other BERNAMA platforms. More global updates in just a moment. This is The World on BERNAMA TV. Stay with us.